those pursuits, then let us know about that. I have found, and this is just anecdotal in my time preaching, I have found that churches tend to go through kind of transitions every 5, 6, or 7 years or so. You settle in for a while. You've got a very similar group of people. You tend to have like a core group of members, and leadership sort of, again, settles in. And then 5 to 7 years or so, people might move away. Some people might move in. Maybe you have an evangelistic emphasis like we do this year, and you get some new members and some new Christians. And the church is sort of like there's some turnover in a congregation. And I'm not saying in any way that that's a bad thing. People come and they move, and then they come and new people come in their place. And so that's not a bad thing at all. Well, I've been here for 5.5 years now, and I'm not sure that we're on the precipice of some kind of great big transition or some big change. But I feel like after 5 or 6 years or so, that it's good for us to look at a lesson like this and ask, how am I fitting in with a group? Am I a newer member? Am I a new Christian trying to figure things out? Am I a member who's been here for 10 or 15 or maybe 20 or 30 years now, and I look around at a changing congregation, and it feels like every month or so I look around at East Shelby and I just seem to know fewer and fewer people. The proportion of people that I've known for 30 years versus the people whose names I don't know yet just seems to be growing with each passing month. And I'll tell you, it's good to be a changing congregation. Transition is a good thing because your alternative is stagnation. And we certainly don't want to be a stagnating congregation. So this lesson is really an appeal to everybody, whatever position you're in. If you've been here for 20 or 30 or more years, this lesson is for you. If you're a brand new member or you've just been here for a year or two, this lesson is for you. If you're visiting, maybe you're on your way somewhere or you're new to the area, this lesson is for you. I want to start in the book of Acts before we get into anything else. Go to the book of Acts in chapter 2. And notice the scene here. As the church, this newborn spiritual kingdom is also going through really the first great transition of its history, which is its inception. And as people get to know each other, as people from different walks of life, different parts of the Roman world come together to form this church family in Jerusalem, take a look at what their priorities were as a church. In Acts chapter 2 and in verse 41, let's pick up there. So then those who had received this word were baptized. There were added that day about 3,000 souls. Can you imagine just like the logistical problems that would be associated with adding 3,000 people in one day? Because when you go back a little bit earlier, the number of the disciples is like 100. And then the day of Pentecost happens, and then and you can do the math. What's the percentage growth from 100 to 3,000 in a day? Someone who's better at math can go ahead and do that math for me sometime. But I would say that's probably a pretty big percentage change in a day. And now there's 3,000 souls added in a single day. And look what their priorities were. As a church, this was where their focus was in verse 42. And they were continually devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. And everyone kept feeling a sense of awe. Many signs and wonders were taking place through the apostles, and all those who had believed were together and had all things in common. They sold their property and their possessions and were sharing them with all as anyone might have need. And day by day, continuing with one mind in the temple, breaking bread from house to house, they were taking their meals together with gladness and sincerity of heart, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord was adding to their number day by day those who were being saved. I think sometimes we read the book of Acts and we look at scenes like that, and all we can say is, boy, wouldn't that be nice? Too bad you can't get that in the modern church. Too bad that'll never happen for us. Boy, imagine what that must have been like to be that early church. So much enthusiasm, So much excitement. They loved each other. They came together. They were eating meals together. I don't know if that would work today in 2024. And I wonder why we put so many limitations on ourselves. We read the scene there in Acts chapter 2 and feel like that's almost like legendary rather than our marching orders. That's what we should be. Preaching the gospel to as many people as we can so that as many people can be saved as possible. And when people are saved, find a place for them in our church family, integrate them into our church family, be devoted to the apostles' teaching, share meals together, love each other, be in each other's homes, cherishing worship times together. But in 2024, what does it often look like in a church? We come together for an hour or two a week. If you can convince people to do that at all, because we got a lot going on. Well, we got the soccer thing, and then there's the tournament, and then, we were going to go out, and we've got that engagement with that. We were going to take that trip to Land of the Lakes or Land Between the Lakes, and it's like we have so much stuff going on, and I've got enough friends as it is anyway. I don't really need more friends than I already have. And so what is the church? I don't mean what is the church in like the hypothetical kind of sense of like what is the church or the kingdom. I mean like what is the church? What is our church? That's why the title is More Than a Face in the Crowd. Because sometimes that's just about all we are to each other. We look around and it's just a face in the crowd. And how do we change that? Well, with all that being said in Acts chapter 2, let's kind of balance the first century church with this other fact. It was not out of the realm of possibility for the first century church to also struggle with some things. That Acts chapter 2 was a really beautiful scene, and they all felt this sense of awe and wonder, but then it wasn't that long after that they started baptizing Gentiles, and it sort of messed up their groove. We had a nice thing going until the Gentiles started showing up, and then they messed up everything. And James actually talks about that in James chapter 2, how it's not out of the realm of possibility for a church family to suffer a little bit from preferential treatment. That's what he talks about there, is personal favoritism and preferential treatment. And you have wealthy church members who are given places of honor and they're treated really, really well. And you have poorer people who show up and you kind of put them in the back. You relegate them, get them out of the way, out of sight, out of mind. And so James felt like that, that happens. Even in the first century, that happens. If Jews and Gentiles could eventually find a way of coexisting, though, then so can anybody. I know at first there was a lot of tension and a lot of friction. They had to get together in Acts chapter 15 and they had to have a powwow about what are we really going to do here about this? And they needed to hear from the apostles, wisdom from the apostles who are inspired. But they figured it out. They figured it out. And so we might come from a lot of different backgrounds as well. In fact, it's kind of cool. I think Memphis is a neat city, by the way, partly because of St. Jude, partly because of FedEx. We do get a very, very diverse group of people in Memphis. The population is very, very diverse, and our church reflects that. And I'm just looking around here. I know we've got some visitors, but there's people in this building right now really like from pretty far away in all different parts of the world where their background is or where they're living. And it is kind of cool to see us all come together. And I think if Jews and Gentiles in the Roman Empire in the first century could find a way of coexisting, there's probably nothing that you and I could put on the table that matches up with that. So we probably need to find a way of coexisting as well. I think if we found some first century Christians and said, oh man, you would not believe what we have to deal with at the East Shelby Church of Christ. We've got people who make a little bit more money than others do. I think a Jew and a Gentile from the first century would go, let me tell you some stories about some of those early days of the church. This guy over here, he wanted to circumcise me. And you think you and I have things that we would have conflicts over. Our common ground, though, is so much more special, so much more valuable, and so much greater than any of the things that make us different. Whether those differences are social or economic or racial, economic and Rachel. How about economic and racial? Here I'm talking about a serious thing here, and I can't help but make it silly by accident. Sorry about that. But if they're economic or they're racial differences or they're geographic differences, Northerners and Southerners, West Coast folks, coastal people, whatever it happens to be, I think our differences just pale in comparison to what we share together, which is our faith in Jesus Christ. Romans chapter 15, verse 7 said, "Wherefore accept one another, just as Christ also has accepted us to the glory of God." So in more practical terms, we need to figure out in a church family like this how we come together and love each other. And love, by the way, is the command. We don't want to think of love as a command because we feel like that cheapens it somehow. I don't think so, though. I don't think so. When you understand what love really is, it doesn't cheapen it to say you are commanded to love one another. What it does, it increases the seriousness of it. That love becomes less of a fleeting kind of thing, like, well, you're in and out of love, or, oh, I just kind of love you. And it becomes, no, you love each other. Stop fighting. Stop bickering. Stop making dumb things important. And love each other. And sacrifice for each other. Be willing to die for each other. We know by this, or we know love by this, that He laid down His life for us. 1 John 3, verse 16. And we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. That's what love is. Laying down your life. Now, you might not ever be asked to die for me, nor I for you. But if the benchmark, right? Like, the benchmark is lay down your life, then everything below that is help someone move furniture. Well, it's not laying down your life, so you can help someone move furniture. Lay down your life. You can give a word of encouragement to someone when they're feeling down. Take someone out for coffee. Get to know a new church member. Be a role model to one of our younger men or our younger women. Teach Bible classes, right? Lay down your life. If that's the benchmark, then there's not really much else you can say that we shouldn't be doing for each other as fellow saints. 1 John 4, verse 7, "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God." Verse 11 of the same chapter, "Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another." John 13, verse 35. Jesus very clearly says that this is the defining mark of His disciples, that by this all men will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. I'm going to tell you something kind of shocking. Now bear with me, and don't take this out of the context of this sermon that I'm preaching, okay? By this all men will know that you are my disciples. Did He say your sound doctrine? Now, are we allowed to, wiggle on sound doctrine because we love each other? Because we love each other, is sound doctrine unimportant? Of course not. So don't take that out of context here. But He said, you know what your defining characteristic is? We're a sound church and we preach sound doctrine. That's our defining characteristic. What about the Ephesians in Revelation chapter 2? They were also preaching sound doctrine, but He said, you got a big problem. Your problem is you're missing love. You've left your first love. Yeah, the doctrine is important, but you know what really defines us? East Shelby Church of Christ, our defining quality is not sound doctrine, although we ought to have sound doctrine, and that is not something that we can compromise. But Jesus says, you know how people will know you're my disciples? Because of the love that you have for each other. That's how people will know that you're my disciples. And I think that sound doctrine becomes a reflection of that love. It becomes a manifestation of our love, not just for each other, but of our love for God. And Lee pointed that out in his lesson last week, actually. That we love God by our obedience. We love God by doing and saying and believing the right things. But it starts with the love. And if it doesn't start with the love, we end up like Ephesus in Revelation chapter 2, preaching and saying and doing the right things, but never having the love. I want to read through just a series of verses here, just very quick bullet point verses to show that this is a theme that runs throughout the New Testament. 1 Peter 1:7, and in your godliness supply brotherly kindness. 1 Peter 2:17, honor all men, love the brotherhood, fear God and honor the king. 1 Peter 1 verse 22, since you have in obedience to the truth purified your souls for a sincere love of the brethren, fervently love one another from the heart. James 5 verse 9, do not complain, brethren, against one another, that you yourselves may not be judged. Hebrews 13 verse 1, let love of the brethren continue. I don't know if you've noticed that lately, last couple months or so, I've been adding that to my prayer. Almost every prayer I say now is, Lord, let love of the brethren continue, because we need to be reminded of that. If I'm expected to lay down my life for my brothers, in 1 John 3:16, if I'm expected to go after a brother or sister when he or she falls, Galatians 6 verses 1 and 2, if I am expected to help with his or her physical needs, James 2 verses 15 and 16, then I clearly need to get to know my brothers and sisters. If I don't know you, how do I know what you need? If I don't know you, how do I know how I can help? We've got to get to know each other better, folks. But someone may say, I feel like I've already got enough friends. I mean, I'll go to church because I'm commanded to go to church. Of course I will. I'll never stop going to church. But Ryan, what you're talking about is a level of social engagement or involvement or commitment that I don't really feel like I need. I've got lots of friends. I got friends at work. I got friends from school. I got buddies. I got the neighborhood group. We always get together and have barbecues, watch the game together. I got plenty of friends. Yeah, I'll go to church because I need to. I get that. But I've got plenty of friends already. Okay. You know, I wonder about that though. Like when you've got plenty of friends already, I guess my response to that is I would wonder why someone would reject what may be called one of the greatest blessings of being part of the kingdom, which is the multiplication of important and substantial relationships. Jesus put it really well in Matthew chapter 19, verse 29. Remember after the rich young rulers there and they had that conversation about the kingdom and you got to go sell all your stuff and really commit and become a disciple of mine and follow after me. And he leaves, he's grieved because he has too much stuff to give up. And the disciples kind of chime in. I've always wondered, by the way, like what's the inflection there? Like how did they say that? Were they gloating? Were they confused? Were they trying to get clarification? I've never fully understood, but the disciples chime in and say, well Jesus, we left everything for you. So, we already left everything. And what's his answer? When you give up everything, when you give up all the stuff out there, the worldly stuff, you will receive many times as much. And he emphasizes relationships. Brothers and sisters, mothers. It is the relationships that we build that are one of the greatest treasures and blessings of being part of this thing. Now, the singing is great, and I love singing. You know when I really like singing, though? I really like singing with the people who I really am close with. That's the best singing, isn't it? And I love worshiping. I love every element of worship. And when I'm on vacation and I worship with another congregation in some distant state, somewhere far away, I love to worship God and I love to meet new people, but I'm always so relieved to come home. And all other things being equal, I will take worship with East Shelby over any other church in America. Because I love being around you. I love to worship God. I love worshiping with you. I love that. And I live far away from family. I'm not like some of you. I don't have a grandma and grandpa down the road. I don't have a brother who lives in the next neighborhood over. My parents live in Portland, Oregon. Closest family I've got is my brother in Dallas. I got to drive 8 hours to go see a family member. You know who's my family? You. You know who I call when I need something? You. You know who I want to go watch the Super Bowl with? You. I've got nobody else but you. Now, don't feel sympathy or pity for me or anything like that, because you're a great family. But I think what happens sometimes is we say, well, I've got brothers and sisters. I don't need any more. I've got friends. I don't need any more. I've got a mom and dad. I don't need any more. I've got a role model. I don't need any more role models. It's like saying I've taken enough breaths already. I don't need to breathe anymore. Or I drank water yesterday. Or I think I had dinner last week. Why would I need to have another bite? Or didn't I pay my mortgage last month? These relationships, these friendships, these brothers and sisters are special. Don't have the social tunnel vision that plagues our society, that keeps us so narrowly focused on a small group of people that is just like us and agree with us and look like us and only do social things and superficial things. Being around the same group of people always can become stagnant. Having only a limited group of friends can become very narrow. So here's some tips on building new friendships. If that's something that you struggle with, and listen, I'm not in any way judging that. I think it is difficult for people to make new friends, and especially to go into a new church where there's like established culture already and there's inside jokes and everything like that. I mean, it's difficult for a preacher as well. You see all the marks of the previous preachers who've been here. You see the handprints right here. If you've ever been up here, you know what it is. You see the handprints of people who've been here before. And so it is difficult to go into a new group. So let me offer a couple of tips here before we get to like our last main point in the Lest All Be Yours, okay? Just some practical stuff on if you struggle to make new friends, and this is something that you would like to do, and I encourage you in this, here's how you make friends. Here's how you make friends. First, ask about people's life stories. Like if you're wanting to get to know people, let them do the talking. Because it's amazing, you don't really get to know people when you do all the talking. And people like to talk about themselves. You ever notice that? People like to talk about themselves. And I don't mean that as some kind of egotistical thing, but you know how you get to know people is you ask them, hey, where were you raised? Where are you from? Are you from Memphis? Or you moved here from somewhere else? Oh, well, that's interesting. I've never been to that state. Will you tell me a little bit about it? What are some things to do if I was to ever go visit there? Oh, wow, that's cool. Get to know people. Hey, what do you do for a living? And then don't leave it at that. They say, oh, I do this for a living. They'll go, oh, okay, yeah. Say, what is that like? How did you get into that profession? Is that something you wanted to do when you were really young, or did you kind of accidentally find yourself in that profession? What kind of degree did you have to get to do that? Hey, what kind of caseload do you have there? What kind of projects are you working on at your job? Hey, do you have to travel with that? You see, that's how you get to know people, is ask their life stories. Where were you born? How long have you been married? How many kids do you have? What do they do? You play a musical instrument. I mean, that's how you make friends, is by talking and listening to what they have to say. I think a second point is be helpful with people. You know how to make friends with people? Be there. Help them. Be there and help them. When someone needs furniture moved, when someone needs help in the yard, when someone needs a meal to be made, if you're trying to get to know a church family, volunteer for that meal list. Volunteer for that meal list. Because people remember the helpful ones in their life. And that's how you can build a friendship with someone, is to be helpful with someone. It does say, Galatians 5 and verse 13, but through love, serve one another. Service is one way that you foster love in a congregation. I think also digging deeper, and let's go beyond just your life story and what do you do for a living. Here's how you build really deep friendships with other people, is get past the what do you do for a living stage, and then ask them, what makes you a strong Christian? Find other Christian men and other Christian women who you admire, and it's okay, by the way, to admire people and to look up to people. Find role models, and then cling on to them and say, what is it that you do as a Christian that helps make you strong? You know, I see you leading songs or teaching. I see you volunteering. I see you leading serving as a deacon, as an elder. I see you've raised your kids and they're amazing, amazing kids. And now you're this dynamic and amazing grandparent. Like, what is it that you've done that has made you such a strong Christian? Find out about people's faith. Find out about their service, their discipleship, how they study the Bible, how they practice the Bible, how they pray, and what their prayer life is like. Stop allowing excuses to keep you from attending things or to going to uplifting activities. You know, if you're not going to group Bible studies, if you're not engaging with our groups on the second Sunday of the month at 9:30, if you are not availing yourself of social opportunities, I guess just kind of ask yourself, are my excuses valid? I don't feel like it. I'm kind of tired today. There's something that I want to watch. What about the game? I guess just ask yourself, what are you trading? What is the commodity that you are trading for better social engagement with your church family? Be accessible and linger. I mean, if you can, I know that sometimes we have to get away to take care of something, or you got to leave worship right away when it's all done. But as far as you can control it, stick around after worship. We say it every single Sunday. Hey, stick around after worship and let us get to know you. Maybe we should stop saying that to our visitors only and say that to each other. Hey, stick around and let's get to know each other a little bit better. Being accessible helps a great deal with that. And listen, there's nothing wrong with proactive friendship building. Like, don't be afraid to go to someone. Don't be afraid to look at someone and be like, that person needs a friend. I'm going to become that person's friend. And just make your way straight to that person and just decide to get to know them. And sometimes that just means asking, like, hey, what are your lunch plans after church today? Can I come with you? And you don't want to be creepy or anything. It's a fine line, isn't it? Right? You have, there's spontaneous and then creepy. Let me offer you a few concerns, though. Some things to think about in getting to know your church family. I think the first concern is, what are we assuming about each other? It's really important that we assume the best about each other. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 7 talks about love, and it says that love bears all things. Love also believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. And I do think sometimes without really knowing someone or the why of their life, we go, you know, they've never had me in their house, so why should I invite them over for dinner? I don't know. If you're the sort of person that's always assuming the worst about everyone, I think you're going to have a hard time making friends. Instead, assume the best. You have no idea why someone has never had you over, or why someone has never been somewhere with you or gone somewhere with you, or why someone might have to leave a social function early. Don't always assume that, like, well, this one's a little snobby, or someone doesn't have time to make friends. I think just be very careful about what you assume about others. Proverbs 13 verse 10 says that through presumption comes nothing but strife. Linger over that. Through presumption comes nothing but strife. The assumptions that we make about each other, about our motives, about why we are the way that we are, without really getting to know someone, that only produces strife in a church family. And so instead of saying, well, I had that couple or that family over already, and I'm just waiting for them to return the favor, maybe we need to listen a little bit more to what Jesus has to say. That when you throw a party or a banquet, invite the people who can't repay that. Invite the people who can't have you over to their home, who can't afford to do that for you. Because that's the sort of thing that God sees. A second concern is, who are we encouraging? You know, we keep lists of people who need encouragement, and in our second Sunday meetings that we have, we talk about someone who may need something, who's been in the hospital, who's feeling discouraged, someone who we haven't seen in several months, and we need to reach out to them and try to get them back in the fold. But sometimes, though, it's the least apparent of us that maybe struggle the most. And I'll give you a perfect example. our elders. We want to write cards to people and send cards of encouragement. And we'll send cards of encouragement to people in the hospital as we should. We send them to our shut-ins as we ought to. And those are all really good things. And don't neglect that. Don't stop doing that. But our elders bear a huge burden. And it is a burden, by the way, it's a burden from without that rests upon them. That they then have to take into an elders meeting in a room with 6 different personalities and 6 different opinions and 6 different ways that they might want to handle the situation. And not only do they have to deal with the burden that comes from without, but then they also have to navigate the difficulties of within that group. And it's a volunteer position. They're not paid the way that I am. Not that that's why I do this, by the way, just to be clear, but I think our elders give as many hours to this church as I do some weeks. And they do that in addition to everything else that they have going on in their lives. And so I think it's just important when you're thinking of someone who needs a friend, sometimes it's the person that you don't think needs a friend that maybe needs a friend more than anybody else. What signals have I been sending right now? Am I the sort of person that do I come across as wanting new friends, or am I kind of prickly and standoffish? Now, maybe that's just your personality and you don't mean to be prickly or standoffish, but I always try to take a step outside myself, look at myself in the mirror and go what have I been conveying? Do I seem like someone who anybody would want to reach out to? Do I seem like someone who would want to go to a social function? Or am I sending all the messages that say, stay away, hands off, I'm not interested, I get up and leave as soon as I can? What signals am I sending to other people? And finally, making the investment in friendship. And this is a difficult one because it's a little awkward. Money is always awkward. Money among friends is awkward. Money in families is awkward. Money in churches is awkward. Talking about money and making an investment in friendship is a difficult thing to say. So I want to offer some balance to this. I want to be very, very careful and offer a balance. When I say making the investment in friendship, yes, sometimes that means literal material things. Money, food, having people in your home, right? But it can be more than that. And there are plenty of very cheap or very free ways that you can also invest in friendship. And so sometimes the investment may be in your time, your emotion, just listening to people. Where you're not getting anything from that exchange. It's not an exchange at all, but you're there to simply provide the ears to listen and help someone just kind of let themselves talk through a problem. And so sometimes it's time and sometimes it is money. Now, as far as money is concerned, though, we need to be careful never to put a pressure on ourselves to be like, well, there are people who have more money than me, and they can have people in their homes all the time. Listen, does it cost money to have someone over for dinner? Yeah, of course it does. Brisket doesn't just appear out of thin air. It costs money to have someone, especially if you're having a whole family, especially if you have the Goodwins over. We're not a cheap dinner date. So does it cost money to have someone in your home and feed them dinner? Yes, it does. It does. Does it cost money to say, hey, can I take you out for lunch? I want to get to know you, or I want to talk about something, or I'd love to. Does it cost money to take someone out for lunch? Yes. Does it cost money to even just buy a cup of coffee? Hey, can I get you a cup of coffee? Yeah, maybe it's a couple of bucks, but it's still money. Now, to those who have the means to do that, 1 Timothy chapter 6 offers some very clarifying advice. 1 Timothy 6 says, to those who are rich in this present world, you need to learn to share with others who have a need. Be open. Be hospitable. If you have a home that can accommodate, then be hospitable. If you have the money to make a meal, then make a meal for someone. If you can do it, then do it. And if you can't do it, then it is also a Christian principle to live within your means. But the warning is, Don't have so much pride that when someone does offer you lunch, I don't think so. I'm not really comfortable taking, I don't really know. Don't have so much pride where you're saying like, well, if I can't pay for my own lunch, I better not go to lunch at all. Yeah, I mean, if I can't afford to bring someone into my home, then I don't feel comfortable eating dinner at their home, because then I feel like there's this imbalance and they've got more and I've got less. Like, that's not what's going on in the church. In fact, Paul goes out of his way in 2 Corinthians chapter 8 when he's talking about different churches like Corinth and other churches. He goes out of his way in 2 Corinthians 8, specifically in verses 14 and 15, to say that, listen, in the church, sometimes you have a lot and you have a little. So you need to share so that they have something. And then a year later, maybe fortunes change and maybe you have a lot and you have a little. So guess what? In the end, what we want is my abundance to serve your lacking, so that someday your abundance might help to serve my lacking, so that all of us are just together as Christians. Because in the end, what do we want? I don't care who pays for it. If I can pay for it, I'll pay for it. We just need to be together. And if as a church family, if we're not coming together and spending time together and loving each other and eating together and doing all those things that people who love each other should be doing, we're going to have a really hard time staying close as a congregation. So make the investment in friendship, however that investment looks, because that investment is worth it. Now, maybe you're not a Christian.